In the late 19th century, European powers gathered to decide the future of Africa. Not Africans, Europeans. In conference rooms thousands of miles away from the continent itself, powerful nations negotiated borders, territories, and trade routes. The decisions made during this period would permanently alter African history, and many of the political crises that exist today across the continent cannot be fully understood without understanding what happened next. By the 19th century, Europe was changing rapidly. The Industrial Revolution had transformed the economies of rising powers. Factories demanded enormous quantities of raw materials. Expanding industries required new markets. Strategic competition between European empires intensified. Africa increasingly became viewed not as a continent of independent societies, but as a vast economic and geopolitical opportunity. Palm oil, rubber, minerals, ivory, agricultural resources, trade routes, human labor. The economic stakes were enormous. As European powers raced to expand their influence, competition for African territory accelerated into what historians now call the scramble for Africa. Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Belgium, and others feared being left behind in the race for global dominance. European powers feared that uncontrolled rivalry in Africa could trigger conflict between European states themselves, and so they sought a solution. In 1884, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck hosted a conference in Berlin. Representatives from major European powers gathered. In 1884, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck hosted a conference in Berlin. Representatives from major European powers gathered to establish rules for claiming African territory. No African leaders were invited. No African kingdoms participated. No African societies consented to the negotiations that would reshape their future. Entire peoples were discussed like assets on a geopolitical chessboard. Borders would be drawn, territories assigned, influence negotiated. The borders created during the colonial period rarely reflected the realities on the ground. Ancient trade networks were divided. Ethnic groups were split across multiple colonies. Rival communities were forced into shared political systems. Strategic convenience mattered more than cultural cohesion. Access to rivers, trade routes, and ports shaped boundaries. For Britain, the territories surrounding the Niger River became strategically important through companies such as the Royal Niger Company. Trade increasingly evolved into political influence, and political influence gradually evolved into territorial control. British officials understood the economic potential. The foundations of British colonial Nigeria were beginning to take shape. Colonialism was also about building economic systems. Railways and ports were developed primarily to move resources outward. Colonial economies were frequently structured around extraction rather than balanced local industrial development. Political control and economic control became deeply interconnected. Colonial institutions would influence African states long after independence. Colonialism also reshaped identity, education, governance, and power structures. European systems increasingly became tied to political advancement. Colonial administrations elevated certain groups, marginalized others, and reorganized traditional authority structures. In many regions, new political tensions emerged within systems designed by colonial powers. The consequences would extend far beyond the era. By the 20th century, Britain consolidated control. They sought a more efficient structure to simplify administration. In 1914, Britain would make a decision that permanently transformed the political future of West Africa. The northern and southern protectorates would be merged into a single colony. A new entity would emerge, Nigeria. This new colonial state was not created through democratic consensus. It was constructed through imperial calculation. In the next episode, we examine the birth of modern Nigeria itself, the amalgamation of 1914.